Welcome. It's our third Roundup panel and we're talking about Milan Menswear. Undoubtedly the most exciting Roundup panel we'll have. Such an exciting set of shows. No, but I shouldn't be sarcastic because we do have a very exciting panel with us, an amazing set of experts. But I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Starting with you, David.
Hi, I'm David Hellqvist. I'm the online editor at Porter Magazine.
I'm Helen Seamons, Deputy Fashion Editor of The Observer.
I'm Patrick Grant. I'm the Creative Director at eTorts.
And I'm Philip Start, and I own some shops and I'm a designer as well.
So I joke that Milan's not particularly an interesting fashion city, but it is, I think, was very noticeable this season, the kind of lull when everyone moved from London to Milan. Helen and David, you were out there. Tell me, what was the vibe of Milan this season? Do you agree it kind of feels a bit like
Yeah, it feels a bit flat. Especially after London, because London's so up and full of energy and we have everything happening, and then you get to Milan and you're just like, oh,
just flattened.
Yeah.
Also because you have Paris afterwards, which is obviously, in a way the highlight. So you have London and then Milan and then Paris. So yeah, and obviously it's almost a 2-week trek. So you are going to feel a bit tired, and Milan is a good time a good place, almost. To
exercise your lethargy.
Yeah, yeah. But you need a break.
A little holiday.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think traditionally Milan is considered to be like that because of, well, there's several aspects, but some of the brands are a bit kind of, for some of us at least, difficult to like. And then there's a city as well. For me, it plays a big part in that because Paris is beautiful, London we know, and then Milan is just this massive grey concrete jungle. It isn't, of course, but that's how you see it when you go in a car from show to show to show.
You said some of the brands in Milan are difficult to like, and I think that's a really interesting point at the moment because there's not much sort of love for the brands. You don't feel like you want to see a really great show from in London everyone's rooting for everyone, it feels like, and it's very collaborative.
Yeah.
What identifies Milan, the kind of people that show in Milan?
Suity people.
Suity people.
Yeah. I always think of Milan as tailoring, and Italians wearing tailoring. So I think that shows through in all of the shows.
Well, I think that they are the big, powerful ones. I mean, that's what Milan is full of. For menswear, they are the biggest, the best financed, the most globally distributed, the ones with the most to lose of everyone. And I think that is what constrains their collections and their shows. They have all the resources that anyone could wish for, but they have so much so much invested in all of their existing distribution and all of their existing customer base. I think it's very difficult for them to take any risks, and that's the complete opposite of what we have in London, which is a bunch of designers with absolutely no resources. I mean, I think if you looked at the average cost of the collections that were shown in London, you probably would struggle to get over about £15,000. The average cost of those collections, you're probably looking at £1 million. And they have there is the London designers, and we are amongst them, don't have that investment, and we feel that we can just do anything we like. And we don't have an established set of customers. We don't have a long history that we need to kind of adhere to, and I think it's difficult for them.
It's stifled.
I think they are, and I think this was a really interesting season in Milan because all of a sudden you see the Milanese houses starting to adopt some of the techniques and trying to pull some of that kind of London energy in and some of that Paris energy, and you've got shows, and we're looking at a screen of all of them now, and that's a great snapshot. You've all of a sudden you've got Dolce doing Dolce doing sort of engineered print and lots of digital print, and there's lots of print all of a sudden in lots of these shows, and I think they're all of a sudden thinking, crikey, we're kind of feeling a bit old, and we look at London and we see all this energy, and you look at obviously people like Givenchy have been doing this kind of technical engineered at the luxury level, and it seems like they're like, God, we need to grab a little bit of this.
And yeah, absolutely. And I think in a way I kind of maybe don't agree with you saying Dolce to Dolce, because for me, admittedly this is 3 seasons in now, but I've sort of had this newfound love for Dolce & Gabbana, where in the 3 seasons they've just started doing stuff which is, at least how I saw them before, a bit different.
Yeah.
And they've gone down to Sicily, they've done all the casting, the collections, the clothes, the prints, everything is back to basics for them. And I really respect it. I think, maybe next season they want to move on from that and do something else, but I'm all of a sudden inspired and actually quite looking forward to a Dolce & Gabbana show. Also, of course, it's a very interesting brand in the sense that a couple of seasons ago, especially with everything that's happening, they just cut D&G loose. And that's a diffusion line, traditionally the money spinning machinery, and they just lost that, and they focused all the energy and the time and the money to make Dolce & Gabbana mainland good, and I think they did.
You can see it through the women's wear as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it goes across the whole board.
Yeah.
I just feel, and I feel it with a few shows. I felt it with the Gucci show.
Yeah, I think Gucci.
I felt it was just, and it almost felt a bit like, your dad trying to dance to dubstep at a wedding. It doesn't feel natural to them, and I don't think they do it with the same kind of inherent understanding of how to use those things and how to make them feel subtle and beautifully refined. I think it's just like plop it in
it's
there.
like someone said, oh God, everyone's doing sport, like you really need to do that.
Yes, there were a lot of collections like that.
And they had that, and they had it here at Gucci, and it kind of doesn't work as well. I don't know. I don't think I did like the jackets, but then I think the Gucci customer, are they looking for?
But maybe the Gucci customer, maybe the Gucci customer needs to kind of leave the 70s behind, the flares and the rubber jacket, and look at what is essentially 21st century wardrobe. And I think Gucci, I love a show where you go in and you expect something, and you get something completely different. And I went in, and I've been to plenty of Gucci shows. I've never felt excited, or I'm not a customer, fair enough, but it never did anything for me. And I left this thinking,
I did love
I'm into
the florals.
I think it's very wearable, actually. I had
really
breakfast
like
with a guy who's in his 60s this morning. He loves his fashion. He's not in fashion. And I was showing him some pictures of things, and I said, it's interesting that a floral suit now doesn't seem so far out from something that you might consider wearing at sort of any age, whereas maybe a few years ago it would have actually been, you'd have just laughed.
No, absolutely.
And now
I think it's been a huge...
Consider it.
Yeah.
But my favourite show was Neil Barrett. I thought Neil Barrett was a really fantastic show.
What impressed you about Neil Barrett?
Well, I just think that he developed from the handwriting that he'd always had into this sort of graphic, angular, sort of minimal shapes that he's used. And I just thought it was a fantastic show. I just thought he sort of stood out from everybody else that was trying to play catch up, and he just said that, well, this is what I'm going to do. So that was my favourite show.
Did anyone else have any standout favourites? Everyone's going to say Prada, so we shouldn't feel like I shouldn't.
I'm not going to say Prada, although it was probably. I mean, it's got to the point where I really don't look at. I mean, I had to go and look at these shows because I don't bother anymore, whereas probably 15 years ago I would have done. But I did think Prada was good, extremely good, and up close apparently it's even better. And the details, pictures tell another story. I actually really like the Umit Benon show. Yeah. That for me was the other highlight. I actually liked the masks, although I don't think they necessarily needed them, and I would quite like to see it sort of with those off, because I still think the clothes, I think he is, there isn't much, you talk about the age of the guy who might be wearing the Italian brands, and I think the age of the guys that are designing, even the young ones aren't really very young. I mean, the guy who, I've written his name down, Andrea Pompilio, who Armani sort of sponsored in this, in what is an admirable attempt, I think, to try and inject some youth into it. He's already spent 13 years at Calvin Klein and Saint Laurent and a number of others, and the young brands in Milan are already 15 years older than the young brands in London. He, I think, is interesting because he is the sort of guy that London has fostered. He's a German-born Turk who studied in you know, in Italy and in St Martin's and at Parsons, and is clearly, you know, has lived in multiple countries and sort of embodies all of that multiculturalism that London kind of embodies. And I think you can see it. I mean, this is a tailored collection, but it's a tailored collection that feels very wearable and quite modern, and it also, you know, it feels very luxurious, but also there's a real sort of freshness to it, and not just because he's doing, you know, caftan shirt thing that we've done, and I like that personally. But I think there was there's a sense of humour. I didn't go to the show, but everything I've read about the show and the music and the staging and all the rest of it felt very cohesive, and it felt honest. You know, that feels like him. Whereas a lot of the other shows don't. You know, they feel like they're kind of borrowing without.
I think that's a really interesting point. It goes back to what we were saying about Gucci, about this idea of authenticity, and I think it brings me to something that I wanted to ask you guys about, which is sort of luxury being a bit confused at the moment, because I think the reason that the Emmett Bernard show felt so authentic was because it was, you know, very true to his roots. He was exploring identity, he was looking at Turkey. But something like Gucci, it looks like exactly what you said, David, you know, shoehorning how men are dressing into a sort of luxury brand, and it was beautiful, but I think it speaks a lot about how Milanese designers are confused at the moment. They're not quite sure what to do. And right at the start, you said Milan, you know, tailoring, but then it wasn't really this season.
No, they tried, as you say, to shoehorn things into it, and some of the collections worked with shoehorning, some of them just didn't work. They just seemed to have everything with the kitchen sink thrown in, see what works.
But it's almost like, you know, that is the natural, you know, well, it's not, because Prada managed to avoid it, but it's, for most of them, it's the natural consequence of having been so good. You know, they had their day, but for some of them, you know, it was 30 years ago, for some of them it was 20 years ago, for some of them 15 years ago. They've built big businesses. It's like they need, you know, it's almost like, and I think Charlie Porter said it, you know, they have the resources to invest in the next generation of great young Italian designers, but they're not doing that. You know, rather than changing Armani, why isn't Armani investing in the new Mr. Armani and helping him, and, you know, mentoring him and building his business and allowing him to be the new voice of Milan, and you know, and keep that refinement and be true to what you are, and rather than try and.
But they are kind of doing that. You mentioned that yourself, how they give you know, the Armani Arena to Andrea, and I think for what I've been told, that there's more projects like that, you know, in the pipeline, where Armani is actually, Armani the brand is going out to kind of help and you know, support young designers. Because I think, and we touched upon this, like Milan is so cliquey. Not only is it cliquey in the sense that like all of the big brands showing are Italian brands, because if you go to, well, Paris at least, and there's so many international brands that come into Paris, but in Milan, all the big ones are Italian, and also they're from a sort of, you know, almost like an older generation, so you don't have the new ones like you mentioned. You know, they're not coming through. So it's not only is it a national clique, but it's like an age clique as well. And obviously they're going to suffer from that, because in a few years' time, some of them are not going to be, at least not designing anymore. And how do you replenish that? And, you know, maybe, hopefully, we've seen at least a few baby steps towards, you know, supporting new generation.
And sometimes they do that. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, like with Trussardi, where they had him there doing an amazing job, and then they replace him with, okay, someone younger, but from the family, and that collection definitely suffered.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, fair enough. Maybe Yumi Benin wasn't right for Trussardi, and, you know,
it's maybe not their vision, but then
I think it's very dangerous for them just to pull in young people and give them their head, because you know, they spent years building up an identity. And you mentioned Dolce. I mean, Dolce really made a fantastic job of staying true to what they've always done, but still looking fresh and
But do you think that's
relevant.
Because it's fun? I think that's what I was thinking a bit about with Gucci. You know, with Dolce, there's a sense of humour. Always with something like Gucci, I think that's the reason it feels fresh. It's not particularly the clothes. It's just because there's always a kind of great.
But they've stuck to their guns, really, haven't they? They haven't sort of imported someone from London and said, "Oh, redesign it." You know, loss of confidence in themselves. They've found the confidence in themselves to go down to Sicily and go to churches and things and redefine their brand using their heritage, though, rather than dismissing it. Same with Armani. Armani has a really, really strong handwriting. You sort of recognise it from 1,000 paces. but you know, they have to find a way of reinventing it without throwing it all away, because there's no point in spending years doing that.
But do we not think that you mentioned this, but do you not think this was happening quite successfully at Trussardi? You know, when Umit Banan was there, he was sticking to the heritage. You know, we were seeing lots of leather pieces, lots of sort of plays on travel, which obviously, you know, that's inherent to a luxury house. And then, as you said, this felt like a step back. It felt like a very simplistic take on the heritage. I think that's why it's a shame to see a young designer. I know. What was your take on this collection? Because you guys were there as well.
The Trussardi one.
Because this is Gaia Trussardi, who's obviously, she's, as Helen said, a member of the family. It's her first collection there.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've seen it, and I
don't have that much to say about it, which I suppose in itself is something to say.
They kind of, I don't know, I feel like it wants to be like Hermes, which is so beautifully executed. It's luxury, like beyond, and then I don't know, it's not quite there. Even though, you know, you can see obviously it's really expensive fabric.
It's very Italian looking, isn't it?
Yeah,
proper
very.
Italiano,
It's quite
eh?
heavy-handed.
I think, as far as I remember, the press release says something about a man on a journey or something like that, which basically just sort of
They're
says,
always on a journey.
you know, we cover basically everything. You know, if you're a man driving a car in a city, we got you covered. If you're in a desert, we got the shorts for that. It's like doesn't. I mean, that's just a bland way of saying
that's almost,
this is everything in nothing.
That's almost how you feel about, you know, the big houses put. I mean, I don't know how many looks it was in the Dolce & Gabbana show, and I don't know how many it was in Armani, but it just felt like
hundreds.
They've got a bazillion designers all like, Christ, you've got to come and, you know, let's do something, and they come up with all of this stuff, and it's like, well, let's just stick it all out there because somebody's going to like some of it, and you know, whereas. Boringly harping back to London, because there is no resource, you have to keep everything really tight, and each collection says something specific, and it has a message, although it might just be one little message, it's clearly spoken, whereas this is, we're trying to say everything about everything all at one time, and you end up saying kind of nothing.
It's true that they need to, we felt that a lot, you know, need to be edited. Like, you go into the shows and it's just way too many looks, and it's kind of like you were saying, they have so much money so they can just produce all of it, and actually maybe they shouldn't, you know. A strong stylist or someone within the company just go, you know, let's just do this, and then cut 10 looks or something and just keep it really focused, but you know, spot on.
Is that the strength of Prada, that it always feels like is that why Prada feels so refreshing, because it always feels like a really concise statement? Is that why because it does kind of flip Milan on its head, you know, everyone waits for Prada, you go to Prada, and
I mean, I think there's no other show, at least for me, I'm sure it's the same for just everyone else, there's no other show where you feel such excitement, and you actually, I mean, you're honestly curious and can't wait to see what
as soon as you open that invite, you're trying to guess, what does this mean? What does this mean? And
it always get an invite.
You're just excited.
It's pure excitement.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
We're not, no one's fooling anyone. It's everyone's just can't wait to see.
Trying to be cool, but they're all a bit like, oh my god.
Let's talk a bit about this season, because this one, it's been incredibly well received. You know, everyone's kind of gone a bit nuts for it. What was so strong about this? Were you impressed by it when you saw it, David?
Yeah, I was. I think it was, you know, it's like you walk in and there's the set design, and straight away, you know, we're all like taking photos and tweeting and talking about it, and we haven't even seen anything yet. So straight away, it's a good design, and the soundtrack with the helicopters and everything, and then, you know, set the scene, and then you have the clothes that kind of continues the narrative and tells the story. War and love, or whatever she said, you know, I think it's great. Obviously the fact that she throws in women's wear, surprises you, but it goes with the story. The clothes are great, the styling's Prada, and I mean, that's the best thing you can say about it, that it's Prada.
I think it's more difficult when you look at it on star.com. We don't have the music, we don't have the excitement. And my first look at it was it's pretty good. It was only when I went back and looked at it a few times, and then that I realised how good it was. It sort of has grown on me rather than instantaneous.
Well, if you're in Milan and you have the opportunity to go and do a re-see and look at the collection, you know, in this case in the actual venue, and feel it and look at it, and you get like
must be
sort
fantastic.
of a different take. It's I mean, it's great, because any collection, not just Prada, obviously. well, you get a different feel for it in a showroom rather than on a catwalk, which is part.
But it is talk of the narrative that's very important. That, you know, having the women in the show and telling a story and having kind of sort of a sexual frisson there as well.
It's interesting that we mentioned the women, because I know we're here to talk about menswear, but Charlie Porter raised an interesting comment yesterday. I think it was actually once we'd gone off camera, which is frustrating. It's always when the best stuff is said.
Well, re-quote him quickly now, then it's on.
But I'll just tell you anyway. But we mentioned the fact that the women in the show, you know, they were wearing dresses, they were wearing these heavily embellished dresses, whereas the men's wear, part of what I think made it really, really strong was it was very, very wearable. I hate that word, but it was, you know, amazing bombers, amazing jackets, beautiful shirts. It felt very relevant to how men dress. You know, it wasn't the suiting that we were talking about. Whereas the women's wear, those dresses, you know, actually very. We both said why weren't we seeing those bombers on the girls as well? I don't know if that jarred with you at all, Helen. You kind of, because I thought they were beautiful. Like, it was only afterwards I thought, you know, why were all the girls in those dresses? That felt very.
Was that part of the story though? That women were being women, and that was part of it.
Because it's set in
I didn't really
40s, 50s anyway, which is a completely different way of dressing anyway. But mind you, in that case, because men dressed a lot more formal at that time anyway, didn't they? But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, she was wearing a bomber jacket when she took her
when
bow.
she came out.
Was she?
At the end,
yeah. It's interesting because it was what we touched on yesterday when we were talking about London, and it's actually the same for some of the designers we mentioned here, Prada and Milan especially. We've talked about this idea of identity and authenticity, and how each collection seems to have a real, in menswear, has a real kind of a vibe, and there's a real character to it. And we were saying you don't get that in the women's wear as well. And I think in that sense for the men's, Milan is quite like the women's. It doesn't feel like you've got that energy, that persona. Everything just feels kind of polished. I don't know if that's kind of a takeaway from the season at all.
I think that's the Milanese machine, isn't it, at work? That's, I think, sort of what we're talking about. The fact that's what Patrick was talking about.
I mean, it's all very good. I mean, you know, you probably couldn't find a badly executed piece amongst all of these, you know, all of these big shows. But, you know, Prada spend their money incredibly wisely. And, you know, you get the sense that she is directing a team rather than just hoping that a team will throw things at her that she likes. And, you know, I think that's really the main difference between Prada as a huge global brand and all of those others, that you feel that she still has a break. I mean, it's funny. I mean, you occasionally meet, you know, I met one or two of the big Milanese designers, and they live in a world that is so far removed from the world that most of us sort of live in. You know, it's a world of, you know, I mean, who knows? It's like that. You know, they travel with their own cutlery and crockery, and you know, there's a bubbly effect that I think distances, and that you don't get the sense that she quite. I mean, she probably does, but you don't get the sense that she does live in that way, and that she is engaged with the world, and she is still curious.
But you know, I think that makes sense because in many ways, like Milan is still this kind of fashion bubble. You know, I mean, that's what these brands try to live up to, and that's what they aspire to be like, because no one else does that. And you know, often you look at Milan as this sort of, as you know, the fashion city with these wacky trends and so on, you know, happen and so on. And I mean, you know, the fact that they apparently travel with their own cutlery kind of makes sense in that case, right? I wouldn't expect anything less.
You know, I don't. Yeah, and I would hate for that to change, because I think the fashion world needs that kind of crazy entourage nonsense to make it feel very special. And I want, you know, and I'd be very, very happy if they all carried on doing exactly that, those that are doing it. But I feel that, you know, what is a bit odd is them trying to kind of get down with the kids when they should be just reveling in their...
In a way, it's a bit like fashion theatre, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, like majority of magazines, etc., go there, to be honest with you, because of the advertising money, right? And Prada is like one of the few shows that you generally wants to see. So they counterbalance that by creating this world of fashion.
Well, I think Prada is one of the few cohesive collections where from beginning to end everything fits together. When you look at all the other collections, there's bits and pieces chucked in. This everything works together, and that's really, really strong and confident.
I go back to Gucci. You know, you can say that it's not true to its roots and the aesthetic they've been going with for a while. But I suppose in a way they're also entitled to move on and change.
Yeah.
So I think this is just a great example, and it was something that really excited me, was to go in and to see these things that.
But do you think that change felt authentic? Did it feel? Because I think I completely agree with you. I was really excited by it as well, and I did think it was beautiful. But I think the takeaway for me is the change felt confused. It felt like a real comment on, and Charlie said this yesterday as well, it felt like a real comment on what was going on in Italy. It doesn't seem appropriate just to show a load of suits when it's such a sort of unstable financial point. It also doesn't feel like luxury is about tailoring anymore, and it felt like clutching at straws.
There is tailoring in there, but it's just majority of it is done in a different way. And there's plenty of other people showing plain suits in Milan, so maybe they just felt they wanted to jazz things up a bit. Can't believe I just said jazz it up, but but they've also mixed that in with what's essentially a basics and staple pieces in a male wardrobe, and for me that's a great thing.
There is a collection that we haven't mentioned, which I think was another. We said everyone got excited about Prada, but also everyone got very excited about Zegna this season, obviously because it was Stefano Pilotti's first season with the house, and it was again an incredibly well received collection, and it was the first show of Milan. It's just that one on the bottom right there.
It was couture. He called it men's couture. I did a re-see, and it's really beautiful things. I mean, it's incredible. Like I left the show not overly impressed. I just felt this is your debut show. You're opening up Milan Menswear on the catwalk. It looked a bit, I don't know, not stand out enough for me. But you go and see the pieces and you feel them. There's some excellent suede shirt jackets he's got going, which is spot on. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the production and everything around it was absolutely amazing. It was maybe one of the best shows I've been to in terms of films and the seating plan and the music. It was impressive. And yeah, I think great stuff. I mean, it's going to be super expensive and no one's going to be able to buy it.
But you say that, but Zegna sells more, men's clothes than like pretty much
everyone else put together.
Exactly. So I think this kind of contradicts a lot of what we've been saying, which I think we all agree with, that in Milan they're afraid to make changes. There's so much money that it kind of hinders innovation. When here you've got an example of a house that makes an incredible amount of money, has a lot of at stake, and is putting a lot on the shoulders of a creative to shape that up.
I mean, I think it will be interesting to see how long they stick with it. I mean, you saw in the first season when Kim Jones went to Dunhill, you saw a huge leap, and then he got reined back in again, and then it sort of trickled away. And it will be really interesting, I think, to see whether they, whether once they get the sales reaction, once they get the customer feedback to all of this, whether they allow him to continue pushing along this path, or whether it withdraws. Because it was a huge leap from where they were before, which was, beautifully executed but quite generic men's clothes. And now it's beautifully executed, quite interesting men's clothes.
I think it feels
he's playing with proportions and shape and, the tailoring. I've never been enormously enamoured with his tailoring. But actually I thought it was interesting and well done. And there is a lot of it. And again, maybe a little edit here and there. But I think, it's good, and I think it was a good departure for them.
So he was the right choice then, we think. Helen, did you?
Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was great. Much more exciting than usual. But it's the same thing. It's like, let's see how long they keep him there. Will he still be there
it feels
in 3
like
seasons?
that's how it should be.
Yeah,
I think that's the
really
context what I feel how the brand should be now.
It looks
I think
modern.
it feels right.
I think it's interesting that you say modern, because I think that's why we talked a lot about Gucci this season, is that felt modern, whether it was right or wrong. It felt modern, and I think this was one of the only other collections.
Yeah, it's got an elegance to it.
And actually, another collection that I was really impressed with was Fendi. And the collection was really nice. The presentation in itself was great as well. Also a pure luxury brand who stuck to its guns, but also injected some sort of I don't know, modern, if you like, energy into it, and I definitely pick up some of those pieces. It wasn't as, you can't really see on these images, but yeah, it was kind of like a sand catwalk, and it came through from a kind of construction site sort of. Did you go to it?
I didn't. I've only seen it from images. But I do think it looks good.
It goes back to this new idea of luxury that you know, we've kind of touched on a little bit as well, because there's a lot of functionality in the clothes that they make, which I think is quite. It's like buying into the craft as well as buying into the label, which I think we're seeing. I think that has come from, you know, you mentioned at the start, like London's energy is kind of seeping over into Milan, but I think there's an element of that in what we saw at Fendi. I think that's why it felt really strong. It felt each piece felt really considered, even if it was just the fact that some of those jackets, some of the blazers were reversible, and you know, it felt like there was it's a very different vibe to what we saw, for example, at Versace or Dolce, where it's very much surface. I think maybe that's why Fendi is so strong, because it feels like there's something. Should we talk about Versace? Because I think you can talk about Milan and not. What was our thoughts on Versace this season? I thought it was utterly bizarre. What did you guys?
I haven't seen it, so I'm looking forward to having a look.
Well, did you go to the show, David?
Yeah, I go to a Versace show expecting, like, you know, a big boom, a massive show, and obviously loads of crazy clothes. I thought it was less crazy and less sort of out there than I expected and thought it would be. So therefore, it kind of took away the whole point of going to a Versace show for me. Yeah, and these, I didn't get this fabric.
The tape,
strips,
you can't actually see it that well in the pictures, but they had this kind of wrestling tape on them, all the models.
I quite liked it because they used it as a print.
Yeah.
There was quite a big paint stripe hand drawn thing across the board, and I like the way they did it with that, like, exercise tape. And then
did you not feel it? I felt like it was the only thing that tied all the collection together, and I thought when you have to use kind of a styling trick to make everything look cohesive, then that's a bit.
And also, if you were to go buy because there's some sweatshirts and so on with them later on, like, if you're buying a Versace sweatshirt, would you just be happy with having a couple bits of orange tape on it? I would sort of want a bit more from them. I mean, the whole Baroque thing they did in gold, you know, I mean, again, they did it for a good few seasons or many years, I suppose, but at least it felt, you know, in line with the brand.
There were a few bits like that. There's a kind of zebra piece, isn't there? The guy with the long hair, and the prints, they're kind of Andy Warhol, the Marilyn ones. There's a Mac. That feels more Versace as we know it.
This is quite good.
Yeah.
These are good.
Yeah.
It was. I think it was the more riotous pieces that felt more Versace. You know, it's kind of what you go and you.
It was quite. I mean, it seems funny to say tame when you're looking at that one compared to Lost. Someone.
It was.
Gladiator.
Yeah. Less nudity.
Yeah.
Which was surprising for spring summer. But I do want to talk a little bit more about what the future for Milan will be, because we've kind of mentioned, you know, there should be more young designers on the schedule. We've mentioned it'd be interesting to see young designers put in positions at certain houses, but how is Milan going to stay relevant, and how is it going to avoid being the fashion city that people eventually start to skip? You know, they'll go out for a day to see advertisers. How is it going to keep a fashion relevance? Because I don't think any of the comments that we've made, other than perhaps on Milan and Prada, is that it has any fashion relevance. It just seems to have.
It just feels like clothes.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is just very nice clothes, which I think is probably the last thing you would want to hear if you were the designer of those things. But it is, and I think it's got to that point where it's very difficult for many of them to retreat from that. And you know that what you see on the catwalk is never going to make its way into the stores anyway, so it's kind of doubly irrelevant, because it's just an exercise in trying to portray something that you know isn't actually going to make it onto the street. I mean, I get, you know, Charlie Porter made a very sensible point in January that they do have the resource to help get behind it, in the way that, you know, Topman have got behind the idea of giving emerging designers a platform. But it's very difficult to see how Milan can do that without feeling like they're just aping London. And if I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't tell them anyway, because I like the fact that we are, London is bubbling up and has this energy. And part of it is just, this is a city that has natural energy anyway. And for a long time, there hasn't been any opportunity for the menswear designers here to do their thing locally. They've had to go to Paris or Milan and work for other people. And they've ended up being sort of, they've had to drink the Kool-Aid for so long that they've, all of that sort of creativity and spark sort of seeps out of them anyway. I don't know what the answer is for them, but it has to be something that feels Milanese and not what we've done.
Isn't it always the case? You have to look at what your strongest points are, and like, this is what we're good at, this is what we can, this is the expertise we have, and then you have to utilize that and you have to push that forward. And that's the second bit. You always have to. This is fashion. They should be pushing the envelope. They should be trying new stuff, and they should be exploring, developing, and trying innovative techniques or whatever it is. And they need to combine these two things, and they need to find some a point where they keep all the great stuff about Milanese fashion, but still make it relevant and interesting, so that we don't just go there because we have to, but because we're truly excited. And without harking on about Gucci too much, but that's for me kind of what they did.
It has to come from the right place. I mean, it has to, like Dolce & Gabbana is sort of coming from the right place. Neil Barrett, I think, also is true to his design history. And I think a few of them are doing it. I think a few of them do understand it, and you can see it, because you've got Cohesive Prada as another one, cohesive ranges. I think it's the others, they're struggling, but if you're just going to, as I said before, you can't just import someone in from London to sort of jazz it up a bit. It's got to come from much deeper than that in their design philosophy, and it might be a slow process. It may be something they can't do in a couple of seasons. It's got to develop, and people have got to feel it. So I think it's got to have strength.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken London. Man started 6-7 years ago.
Man, I think was 4. No, New Gen Man was 4 years ago. Man was 8 years ago.
Yeah. It's taken that long, and a concerted effort by also, we have a fashion council that, just embraced what we were doing. And it took a while. I sat on that menswear panel for 3 years trying to, there were a few of us were like, we need to get the shows and we need to do this. But they've gone for it and embraced it wholly. And you don't get the sense that there is, and also that, that the BFC is, the panel that looks after menswear is made up of lots of great people who really get it and love it and really understand men's fashion and its importance, and are collectively able to drive it forward. And it feels very cohesive, and also there's a solidarity amongst the designers, and the whole thing feels very real, and we all go and we sit in the same showroom, and we all kind of sit in a crap minibus in Hong Kong together, and there's a real sense of sort of camaraderie and ongoing. We're all on a budget adventure together, and you don't get that sense that there is any unity of that sort in Milan, and somebody needs to bring it together, and who knows who it is. I mean, Mr. Armani was saying, I will not join until all the Italian brands come back to Milan. That's kind of like not the right attitude. You need to just go with it, and
we're saying that there is a few different competitions and exhibitions and so on in Milan where they try to grow talent, and also you have in Florence at Pitti, there's a couple of initiatives where
they showcase people.
Where they're trying to to push them through.
I think they're trying. I think they're aware of it. I think when you're an established house, like you can imagine a big house, it's quite difficult for them when they see the market going past them, and they're not on the bus. So
they wouldn't get on the bus. They'd be horrified.
It's a student bus anyway. It's full of students.
Exactly.
But I'm interested because we said it's clothes, not fashion. But then, working somewhere like the Observer, do you find that actually the brands that we're talking about in Milan as not being exciting things like not being exciting, but not being perhaps at the forefront of fashion. So Dolce or Armani, they're the ones that actually your average shopper thinks of as fashion and still engages with.
Yeah, they do. Those names, you still say Armani, everyone knows what that is, and it's like, oh, that's great, isn't it? Like a not outside of fashion. They all know those names.
I think that's what's
and they will continue to know those names for as long as those names spend £1 billion a year on marketing. I think 35 years ago it was much easier for Mr. Armani and co to get in and break into fashion because I'm probably wrong, but it didn't, you didn't get the sense that there was such an all-dominating power of the advertiser back in those days, and the print media was much more, there was far more print media, and they were much more open to embracing kind of new and emerging brands, and things rotated much faster. There were a lot of brands, but there was more churn.
But in that case, fingers crossed that there is some sort of mini resurgence going on then, because if Armani is starting to support new talent, and admittedly he just gave him his venue, but you start somewhere.
It's a big start.
And if Dolce,
if someone like him does that, then other people
and also Dolce & Gabbana, that's my opinion. But if you feel sort of revitalized in the collections, and there's this kind of let's just create great stuff again, because to be fair, they don't really have to. All of these big Italian brands could just sit back and not care and just sell almost on the high street, but all the perfumes and everything they want. They don't have to push the envelope, but maybe they are. Maybe they feel like doing it, and I think that's great.
I think it's it's almost like they don't need a plan; they just need the desire. And London, there was looking back at those meetings where we sat there 5 years ago, there wasn't a big plan. It was just like, we know that we need to do something, so let's just do some stuff. And actually it just naturally, one thing led to another, and we got there. They just need the desire to want to change it, and at the moment you feel that there is a slight reluctance to do that.
I think that's a pessimistic but an appropriate note to end on from that, because they need to get that desire interaction. So even though it wasn't the most exciting season, should we give them a round of applause anyway?
Absolutely.
And hope for more for the future.